It is February 28th, 2025. And y'all, I was not planning on making a second video today until I saw the utter fiasco that unfolded during Zelensky's visit to the White House. We are going to be looking at what was said, how it escalated to the point of Trump scolding Zelensky like he was a child, and also what has been said since then, because Zelensky is not backing down. He seems to think that Europe is going to save him, and he's insisting that he needs security guarantees from the US, and good luck to him getting them at this point. It is not looking good for him, especially with some of what Trump had to say when he's literally looking at Zelensky saying, it's very difficult to work with you right now. What he's really saying is, I could replace you very easily. Is that going to happen? Well, we'll be getting into all of that and more here in today's video. But first, just a quick reminder that your support makes my work possible. So if anything in these videos resonates with you and you want to sign up as a monthly paid subscriber, you can do so now on my pages on Patreon or on Substack. You can also send a one-time donation over on my page on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll leave all of the links in the description box below. And be sure to check out the interview that I posted earlier today with Kavorek Almasian, where we talked about all of the latest happening in Syria. Very important information. I know it's not the main topic of today that everyone is talking about, but definitely good information to check out when you have the time. All right, let's get into what in the world happened at the White House today. Now, as a reminder, today was a big day for Zelensky. For the last couple of weeks, he and Trump have been hashing it out in various statements that have been reported and spread online. You've had Trump call Zelensky a dictator. He's called out the fact that Zelensky is a bit overdue, a year overdue for Ukrainian presidential elections. And you've had Zelensky say that Trump is just believing Russian propaganda and that he's stuck in a disinformation bubble. So they've had this back and forth. There's also been a lot of discourse about a possible deal that would give the US access to Ukraine's supply of rare earth minerals. Some very big demands from the Trump administration claiming that there don't need to be any security guarantees, that this deal is just to pay back what Trump estimates is over $350 billion in US support for Ukraine over the last 3 years. Now, it was reported that Trump dropped his demand for $500 billion in rare earth minerals. But that doesn't even seem to matter at this point, because as of right now, there is no deal that has been signed. It was a very unsuccessful visit for Zelensky, and we're going to get into why. But it was interesting to watch the way that this meeting progressed. You had Trump, Vice President JD Vance, and Zelensky sitting there in the Oval Office surrounded by reporters. This is not a closed door meeting that we are reporting on after the fact of, oh, so-and-so said that this was said or that was said. No, we have the video. We saw this play out live in front of really the whole world at this point. And what I thought was interesting was you had JD Vance. He kept bringing up the need for diplomacy, right? Because that has been Trump's focus. We need to end the war in Ukraine. We need to focus on diplomacy. Look, he knows that the US and that NATO, that they are not going to win this war against Russia on the battlefield. They're certainly not winning it right now. So then Zelensky chimes in and he decides that his trump card, if you will, is to bring up the Minsk Accords of 2014 and 2015, which were supposed to lead to a ceasefire. Absolutely. A ceasefire not between Ukraine and Russia, because that wasn't needed at the time, but between the newly installed Western-backed Kiev regime and the newly declared independent republics in the Donbass region, filled with primarily ethnic Russians who were being attacked and targeted by the newly built up extremists in Kiev who were making it illegal to speak Russian. They were targeting everything Russian culture-wise and going after these ethnic Russians. So you had the people in the Donbass say, you know what? We are going to declare our own breakaway republics. We're not doing this. We're not a part of Ukraine anymore. You also had Crimea say that they were going to return to Russia because, as a reminder, they were part of Russia up until the 1950s. when they were gifted to Ukraine under the Soviet Union. I just have to mention that in there because it's an important detail that often gets lost. So Zelensky decides during this meeting, he's just going to bring up the Minsk Accords.
He occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now the President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014.
2014.
Well, 2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but,
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him.
So Zelensky seems to act as though there's this jump from 2014 to 2022, right? As if they had some sort of ceasefire agreement that was signed. Everything was fine and good for 8 whole years. And then out of nowhere, Putin woke up one day and said, let's start bombing Ukraine. That is very clearly not what happened. But what I was mentioning earlier about Kiev targeting these independent republics in the Donbass region, they killed thousands of people there over the course of those 8 years. And Russia kept coming out. They kept calling on the international community to respect the Minsk Accords over and over again. Then come 2019, and this guy, this comedian turned actor turned presidential candidate named Zelensky, he was elected on the platform of peace, on the platform of let's all work together. We know that there are, interests coming from Europe, from the US, and from Russia. Let's find a way to work together. Well, that lasted for a few months, and then some of those right-wing, Banderite, fascist extremists clearly got to Zelensky, because come September 2020, you had him rolling out a new national security plan, which specifically listed Russia as an aggressor and NATO membership as the key objective for Ukraine. So that's sending a very powerful message to Putin that not only is Kiev not going to stop targeting these independent republics in the Donbass region and killing ethnic Russians there, but that he wants NATO membership, despite the fact that Russia has spent years, decades really, saying that this is a red line for Russia, that clearly no one is listening here. Zelensky then keeps going, and in 2021, he doubles down on the demand that the international community needs to work to force Crimea back under his control. Again, Crimea, the peninsula that voted overwhelmingly to return to Russia. And yet Zelensky is sitting here saying, I love freedom and democracy so much that I demand that Crimea come back under my control. So there's a lot of context here that is left out by the media as a whole, by the US government, and also in today's meeting by Zelensky. And I thought it was interesting because then we had JD Vance jump in here, and he straight up calls Zelensky out, right? I will give credit where credit is due. Mass forced conscription has been a major problem in Ukraine over the last 3 years. We've seen these horrific videos of men getting dragged off the streets by press gangs, forced onto the front lines with very little experience. They are literally being sent to their death when they are being forced into this war against Russia. And JD Vance straight up calls Zelensky out about it in the Oval Office.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems?
And you watch Trump sit there for a second, right? He watches this discourse kind of unfold. And the point when he decides to jump in is when Zelensky decides that he is going to start lecturing the president and vice president of the United States, the country that he is currently visiting, to beg for more money and more support and future guarantees for future conflicts against Russia. He is there to ask for their help, and yet he's sitting there and deciding that he is going to start lecturing them on the problems that we have here in the United States.
God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very
you will
good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From
it.
the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a
Brown,
good position.
I
You don't
was
have
in
the cards right now. With us, you start
I'm
having
not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
Yeah, you're
serious,
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
And just a quick note here to say, if only Trump would stand up to Netanyahu like this. Like we saw the Trump-Netanyahu meeting when Trump is literally pulling out the chair for the Israeli prime minister, going above and beyond, acting like he's the servant. Trump needs to take that treatment he just gave to Zelensky, and he needs to bring it to Israel real fast. I'm just saying. I know that's not what this video is about, but I just wanted to throw that out there. All right, so I'm watching this unfold in real time, and there was kind of a moment of disbelief, right? I had seen some different posts on X, right? People were quoting on it in real time, and I'm like, oh, I guess I really need to get on and watch this, because I was kind of watching it passively. And so I get on and start watching, and I'm like, oh, this is really happening. Oh, Zelensky is not shutting up. Like, that has got to be his biggest problem, right? Again, you come to a country begging for money, and then you keep talking over the guy who you're begging for money from. And on top of that, again, this is not a private meeting. They're out in front of a room full of reporters. The more that Zelensky talks over Trump, the more that Trump is going to continue, and he's going to keep scolding him because he's got a whole audience. Not to say that that would not have happened privately, but publicly, Trump kind of has to call him out because Zelensky just keeps going and acting like he's so much better than these two people. Like, yeah, they're the new administration, but guess what, buddy? You don't have the Biden administration anymore. If you want their support, you are going to have to show an ounce of humility. And yet Zelensky just comes in like, oh, have you ever been to Ukraine? You want to tell me about my problems? Like, you're going to have a lot more problems if the Trump administration actually were to cut off support. Your government, your military would completely crumble. And Zelensky still seems to think that Europe is going to save him. I'm like, he is in for a serious wake-up call if this is how he's going to keep acting, which from everything we've seen, this is how he's going to keep acting. So because Zelensky won't stop interrupting him, and because they have a full audience with cameras all around, Trump continues. And that's when he calls Zelensky out on the fact that and he makes it more so but it needs to be noted, if Kiev is not winning a war against Russia, then that means that the US isn't winning it, and that all of NATO is not winning it. Therefore, they are losing a war against Russia. That's what Trump's saying here.
Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we
coming
are
out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over In 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, I tell you.
And it is just mind-boggling to watch the fact that Zelensky still doesn't get it. He literally stepped out of that car. Trump greeted him at the entrance to the White House. And the first thing Trump said was, "Look at you. You dressed up today." Any normal sane person would clock that right off the bat. Any normal sane person would have watched the meetings that Trump had earlier this week with French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and they would have known, okay, Trump trolled the crap out of these other two world leaders who, I mean, he has to deal with them, right? The U.S. is in various alliances with the U.K. and the EU and countries throughout Europe. So Trump has to deal with them. He clearly was not a fan of Macron's. He clearly trolled Starmer all the way through. So if Trump is doing that to these two established leaders, how do you think he's going to treat the guy who he just called a dictator without elections a week ago? Zelensky should have come into this completely differently. And of course, he didn't. And because he didn't, the planned joint press conference that was supposed to happen today was canceled. And then we got a very quick video of Zelensky being ushered out of the White House back to his car. And he abruptly left the White House after that Oval Office press conference that they had. And there was no more to today's meeting between Trump and Zelensky. And then Trump released a statement on Truth Social in which he said that Zelensky had, quote, disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office and that he can come back when he is ready for peace. Trump then doubled down and declared that there needed to be an immediate ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, or else Zelensky would risk losing support from the U.S. Now, I do not expect there to be a ceasefire. I don't think that that's something that Russia is going to agree to, at least for right now. They've been pretty clear that, look, if there's going to be a ceasefire, we need to have a full deal made. Until that deal is made, until we're happy with the deal, there's no ceasefire to speak of. But it is interesting that Trump is putting out there, it's like he's giving Zelensky chance after chance after chance to just be a little bit humble. Zelensky does not realize that he is a US puppet and that he can be easily replaced. He thinks he's special. And at this rate, I don't know if anyone can talk sense into him. If being publicly embarrassed at the White House with Donald Trump scolding him like a child is not enough to bring some sense and humility into his mind, I do not know. It may not be possible at this point. Speaking of, Zelensky clearly has not gotten the memo, as the Associated Press is reporting that he declared that Ukraine won't enter into peace talks with Russia until it has security guarantees against another offensive. And as for right now, any talk of a possible minerals deal between the US and Ukraine seems all but non-existent, which is also interesting because you have reports coming out saying that Trump did not even want to meet with Zelensky today, that he tried to get out of it. At least that's according to French media, which reported that Trump planned on canceling this meeting, but that Macron intervened on behalf of Zelensky. And I know that a lot of people have been talking. There's been a lot of questions about, was this all a setup, right? Was this some sort of planned meeting that Zelensky was going to come to Washington, D.C. and be completely humiliated by Trump to make it look like Trump is this powerful world leader, that he's calling out Zelensky and that he's taking control of the situation? And then is nothing going to change as a result? Is the U.S. going to keep supporting Ukraine and keep propping up Zelensky? And I don't know. I think that what we saw today was the real Zelensky. We saw this ego, this arrogance that it's hard to wrap your mind around it. But I think we also have to remember that for over 3 years now, Zelensky has been the prince who was promised. He has been propped up as a sort of little G god, where you have all of these different mainstream media networks here in the US sending their reporters over to Kiev every week, doing all these in-depth stories with Zelensky. He's Time Magazine's Person of the Year. He's in Vogue magazine, for crying out loud. Him and his wife, which It's going to get real interesting if the Trump administration does follow through on any kind of investigation about where all of the money that they sent went. I would love to see what Zelensky's wife is up to right now, because there's been quite a lot of reports about the wealthy lifestyle that she has lived over the last 3 years. I'm just saying. But I do think that what we saw was Zelensky, right? I think that he came in thinking that he was going to talk tough, that he was going to stand up to Trump and Vance, and that Europe would have his back, which good luck to him, right? If he thinks that Macron and Starmer and all of these other European leaders, that they are really going to back him when times get tough, if the US pulls out completely and stops supporting Kiev, they're going to be in for a real wake-up call, because Europe has no backbone. They're going to follow what the US does. Maybe they may do it a little bit late. They may learn the hard way, but they're eventually going to have to follow suit with what the US decides. If the US decides to make peace with Russia and to reestablish dialogue and normalization and to lift the sanctions that were imposed on Russia, Europe is eventually going to have to follow suit. They are not going to be able to survive on this current path that they're on if they do not have the US there as their backbone. And that's going to happen sooner rather than later. Now, as for the question of whether the Trump administration is going to do anything, if there's going to be any major changes, that is the sticking point that I am waiting to see, right? I see what Trump is saying. I see that there's a lot of talk, but so far, there has not been a lot of action beyond just reestablishing dialogue between the US and Russia. And yes, that is important. Yes, that is progress. However, I'm still waiting to see, okay, when are we going to start lifting sanctions? When are we going to start really pursuing normalization? When is the US going to start pulling back on support for Ukraine? Because once that action starts happening, then it will be a little bit more believable. Right now, it's a lot of talk. Right now, it's very clear that Trump does not want to put up with Zelensky. He literally sat there and told them, it's very difficult to deal with you. But we also have to remember the fact that even if Zelensky is booted out tomorrow, right? Let's say that Ukraine holds elections tomorrow. There is no such thing as a free and fair election in Ukraine as it stands right now. Zelensky has banned all of the top opposition parties. He's nationalized the media. He has gone after any kind of possible opposition. Anyone standing up to him, telling him the truth, has been cast away, and he has claimed that he is doing so because he's fighting corruption. So very important to keep in mind here, just because if Zelensky is done away with, right, if he's booted out and someone else is put in his place, it could be someone just as bad. It could be someone worse. We don't know yet. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot of action that still needs to be taken. All of those things which are important to keep in mind as we keep watching the way that this fiasco unfolds between the US and Ukraine, because I know that the world is watching right now, and that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also check out Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.